Hi everyone, I'm Shaylin with Reedsy, and today we're going to be talking about world building. Today I'm not going to dive into the intricacies of how to world build because that's a very huge topic, but I will leave a blog post on the topic of world building in the description if you want to learn more about how to do it. Today I wanted to kind of tackle a very big question, which is how do you know when you've done enough world building, or how much world building should you do before writing? Like everything, this is very circumstantial, so my goal with this video is to hopefully guide you towards the questions that will help you know if you've done enough world building for your personal project, since there is no general cap for this. Today I'm going to be talking about fantasy world building, but this does really apply to anything. Fantasy is usually just the genre where people get stuck on this. Usually contemporary writers don't hold off writing for 5 years because they feel they haven't done enough world building, but it does happen to fantasy writers quite a lot. So first, let's look at this based on 3 different scenarios based on a person's writing process. So first of all would be pantsing. Pantsing is when you fly by the seat of your pants and you go in without any planning whatsoever, or maybe you've done some mental planning but you haven't really done outlining or anything. If you are going to be discovery writing the plot and the world, I would recommend keeping pretty detailed notes on the world as you're discovering it, so that by the end of the book you have created a world building Bible. You have all those notes to keep everything consistent. Also, so that if you make a decision in chapter 2, you can make the same decision and stay consistent with that in chapter 15. Another technique some fantasy writers use is to plan the whole world out beforehand, but not plan the plot. So they plan the world and then drop the characters into the world and then see what happens. Now in this type of writing process, you need a very in-depth understanding of the world because you're relying on your understanding of the world to guide the plot you haven't yet created. You don't know where the plot is going to go or what it's going to involve, so you need to kind of account for almost everything in your prior world building. I believe this was kind of a Tolkien-esque kind of way of approaching world building and writing fantasy, where the writer creates the whole world beforehand because they just have a passion for creating worlds. Then they want to use it somehow, so they go, well, might as well drop some characters in there and see what happens to them. The final approach would be planning, which is where the writer plans out pretty much everything beforehand. They plan out the plot, they make an outline, and they do their world building beforehand. And this is a case where writers often become stuck in a bit of a world building loop. You need to do enough world building to inform the entirety of the plot. Any world system the plotline is based of, you need to have a very deep understanding of. So let's say you're writing a book about dragon trainers. Obviously, you need a very in-depth understanding of how the dragon training system works within the world, but then you also have to know how other world systems are going to work because they're going to intersect with that. So for example, the government, are there regulations on dragon training? What are the laws around this? What about the military? How are dragons trained to be used in warfare? Some world systems might have very little effect on this dragon training. Maybe the banking system doesn't really affect the book at all, but you should still have knowledge of what it is. The reason you need to understand your world beyond just the general systems it's based on is because of the smaller details. You could outline your entire book and know everything that happens, but you can't really plan for every single individual detail. If you think of a contemporary book and you read a plot summary of it, start to finish, you would think that it only deals with these themes and topics. But on the individual scene level, when you zoom in, there's going to be mention of so many themes and topics that don't have immediate effect, like the plot isn't built around them, but they're still relevant for fleshing out the detail level. And that detail level is really important. It's what makes the book feel so alive and fleshed out. Now, of course, it's impossible to plan for every small detail that's going to appear in your book, but that's why it helps to have more world building done outside what you immediately think is necessary. To make your world seem rich, it's going to need a lot of details that might seem irrelevant when just looking at the plot so zoomed out like in your outline. So what's too much? When have you gone overboard with world building? I think the world building trap often comes from writers who are trying to recreate the real world in terms of complexity, which is impossible. No human on Earth knows even a fraction of the collective information that makes up the entire world. We're talking the entire history and knowledge of every single human being, and it's never going to be possible for anyone to create all that in a fantasy world. What you want to do instead is create the illusion of this complexity, even if you yourself do not know all of it. I believe there's a quote from Brandon Sanderson on this, where he said that he'd heard it said before that when world building, you are only going to show 10% of the world, but you need to know the other 90, just like an iceberg. But what he said was, that is a waste of time. You do not need to know the other 90. What you need to do is show the 10%, know the next 20 to 30%, and then make it look like you know the rest. So, with all that said, enough world building generally means that your book and the amount of world building you've done for it satisfies these criteria. You have a complex understanding of everything immediately relevant or adjacent to the plotline. So this will include locations, relevant history, and world systems. You understand the logic behind these systems, including how they came to be implemented and why the world works this way. Logical consistency is so important, and the why is just as important as the what. When someone asks you about these elements of the world, you can give answers. I think this is a great test to know if you've done enough world building. Sit down with someone and get them to ask you questions. First of all, they'll ask you questions you've never really considered before, really important ones, but you can also test your knowledge to see if you really know it well enough. You have a solid knowledge of all of the other general systems of the world, for example, education, customs, religion, etc., even if they aren't immediately important and they aren't what the book is based on. You have a general understanding of the rest of the world and what it involves, even if it isn't super detailed. You can also look at it this way. These are the things that your world building needs to inform, so make sure you have done enough world building to inform all of these things. What happens, why it happens, why the world works this way, and what the world looks like. And all of these things need to be logically consistent. So those are kind of the questions I would run through if trying to determine if a book has enough world building. Thank you so much for watching, and remember to subscribe for new videos every Tuesday and Friday. Until next time.